today to talk about the Hemp Farming Act, which is one of these crazy South Carolina laws that was enacted by our legislature, and the CBD industry is basically under attack in the state of South Carolina. There's a lot of really good people that are pushing back and trying to get the law so that it protects consumers and allows the industry to exist for farmers and processors. So we're here today with one of those farmers, and I'm going to let him introduce himself to all of you.
What's going on? Nice to meet you.
Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Cody Callarman. I've been a hemp farmer in this state since 2020. I came back from California, so I was in a very legal state. I got involved in cannabis because I saw how it changed people's lives for the better. Back in 2014-15, my mom had a surgical accident that left her right leg paralyzed. She was on opioids and all that crazy stuff, and it wasn't until she had a stable supply of cannabis. Of course, she had to be a criminal to do it. She was off all that stuff in 2 to 3 months, and I still wasn't a believer. I'll be the first person to tell you I was wrong. And it wasn't until 2017, so a couple of years after I got out of the Marine Corps, I was abusing alcohol, and luckily I lived in California. And first time I tried it, I said, "How is this illegal?" And it kind of started this spiral of me learning the benefits and other veterans coming out to me and saying, "This helps me, this works for me." And all it really took is some of my mom nudging, saying, "Hey, you should come to South Carolina and get in the hemp program and help change the state." And I said, this is something I believe in. I always wanted to leave a legacy and do something fulfilling. So here I am today.
Well, it's really important work. So a lot of what I do is work with injured people, that before legalization of marijuana in some places, and then before CBD products, their only options as far as painkillers and that sort of thing really was, alcohol, opioids, all these very highly addictive things that have other side effects, over and above what some of these products don't have. And so that's what really dialed me into it, is I was hearing from a lot of clients that, were saying, "Hey, I'm experimenting with this. It's really making a big difference. You should look into it." And so I started looking into it, and I was just kind of amazed at how restricted, basic gummies are. I mean, there's Jimmy Buffett's song, "Rest in Peace" or whatever. My gummy just kicked in, and I went and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of a funny song." But you hear the story of the song, and it's basically they were having a dinner party, and one of the women, who's like a grandmother age type person at the dinner party, is like, "Oh, my gummy just kicked in." So everybody is using these things for, all sorts of back pain and day-to-day things, and yet we're regulating it more restrictively than we regulate opioids, which, created a national epidemic, and more restrictive than what we're doing for alcohol, which, more people die from alcohol every day than almost anything else. So, tell us a little bit about what it took to get into the industry. Obviously you came to South Carolina. It's an interesting place to do this kind of business. Tell us what it was like getting started.
It definitely opened a can of worms on the state. And I'm from here. I love it. I came back, and that's why I want to make a difference. So to be a hemp farmer, all you have to do is a background check through SLED, make sure you have no drug charges or anything like that. For farming, you have to have the land wherever you're doing it. You just essentially have to provide maps with lat longs and where you're growing stuff, so that way the state knows where you're going to plant. You have to tell them when you're planting, when you're harvesting. They have to come out and test 30 days before harvest now. So it's actually quite simple and almost so easy. Your grandmother could do it, basically. And then through farming, and then also being an advocate in the medical cannabis space and trying to bring that to South Carolina. That's what brought me to starting my own brand and making products. And that's really where I started peeling back the onion on, wait a minute, there's only one law with these hemp products. And that's, I know we're going to get to the DHEC letter, but it's essentially where it came from. Is there a lot of bad actors in the hemp CBD space nationally? Absolutely. One of the reasons why I started the brand was about 2 years ago. A lot of the opposition to medical cannabis talks about it's too strong, it's untested. So I started going to stores and testing products, and a lot of it, I agree with police on this part of it, that a lot of it is somewhat illegal according to tests, or there's heavy metals and pesticides in it. And that all essentially comes down to there's no regulation.
Right, it's a regulatory problem.
Yes,
right.
Because the federal and state law says it just needs to be under that 0.3% delta 9 THC.
Right.
So other than that, it's just like the vitamins and nutraceuticals. There's no laws.
Right.
So I have seen in the last 3 years consumers becoming more aware of what is in it, how much is in it. I've tested gummies years ago where they said there's 50 milligrams in it and there's only 20, or double, but who knows. And just I wanted to have products, and I hold our products to a Colorado cannabis standard in terms of where it was grown, processed, full panel test, all that fun stuff. And there's a bill, I think it's 4628 or something like that in the House, where it's to regulate these CBD products, which we support. And then we got blindsided by this DHEC letter.
So let's back up. So we've got, all right, so on the farming side, you have to get a permit to farm hemp, right?
Yes.
You don't have to have a permit, as far as I'm aware, to farm anything else in South Carolina, or do you? Do you have to have a permit to farm corn or soybeans?
You just have to report to the FSA, the Farm Service Agency, which is nationally.
That you're farming?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm growing corn or soybeans, do I have to give them like a map of my farm and say this is where I'm planting the corn?
No maps. You have to report how much acreage, though.
How many acres you're farming, and basically what general type of farming you're in, right?
Yes.
Okay. So hemp on the front end is already regulated more stringently than other types of crops.
Comparatively, yes.
Okay. And how many permits, if you know, do they give out every year for hemp?
There's no cap on the number in South Carolina. So, I mean, essentially you could go and I guess in your backyard, as long as you plot it out and give them a map and where the street is.
Okay.
And then the only other licenses are if you're processing. So that's something I'm not a chemist.
Right.
But you're essentially taking the plant matter, which we call biomass, and converting it into a crude oil, I guess you could say, and then from there you extract the CBD and the other cannabinoids, and which we use as product manufacturers to put in the products to give you end product.
Okay, so basically you grow the plant, right, and you take care of the plant, and the plant has a flower, right, and then like what happens? Where does it leave you and your farm and go off to be processed? Like how does the harvesting process of hemp look?
We can get really into genetics and all that, but essentially, whether you're growing outside greenhouse or inside, you generally know when the plant's in its flowering phase, it's 7-8ish weeks, or if it's autoflower, shorter. So you generally know at this week it's going to be done. So you have to let the state know, hey, I'm going to be harvesting this soon, and they have to come out and get a test within 30 days of that harvest. So they come out, Department of Ag team's great. They come in there and they just randomly snip plants and they send it off to testing, which we got to pay for it, of course. And then once the test comes back, we're allowed to harvest. Then they call.
How long does that take to get the test back?
Like a week, depending on. We have gel here, which is in West Ashley, so it's a fairly quick turnaround.
All right.
They just have to mail it USPS.
Right. And the test is to tell how strong the THC is, or what's the test for?
Yes. So all their testing is to make sure it's under that 0.3% delta 9 THC.
Okay.
Other than that, they don't really care about how much CBD or whatever is in it.
Okay.
And then from there, I harvest, and then they come.
How do you harvest it? Like, what does harvest look like? Well, first of all, are you growing inside a greenhouse, or are you growing outside?
I was growing inside, but also do grow outside.
Okay, and you're on that step.
Yes.
Okay. And so when you're harvesting, like, what does that look like? Is it different inside or outside, or is it all kind of the same?
Pretty much the same. One thing, you have to cut the plant, so essentially just at the bottom of the stalk, and then you bring it. Personally, I bring it inside, dark room, climate, temperature controlled, humidity controlled. Hang them upside down for 1 to 2 weeks, and you're essentially wanting to get the plant down to a certain dryness, I guess you could say, a moisture content.
Right.
And then from there, depending on what you're going to use the flower for, you can trim it and then ship it off to somebody else, and they sell it out of state. Or if you want to have it processed, the processor might ask you to. It's called bucking, which you essentially just run. You just knock all the buds off, the colas, as we would call them, off the plant. They would grind it up, and then they use that to extract all the terpenes and oils out of the plant.
Okay. So when it leaves your hands, how, like, is it's in a box, it's in the back of a car, like, how are we getting this stuff to the processor? What's it look like?
I mean, if you're farming acres of it, you're talking thousands of plants.
Right.
So that's another thing. So in South Carolina, I actually have a card, so I'm allowed to carry plant matter. Processors are allowed.
Card carrying, horticulturalist.
Yeah, just because it would be really weird to get pulled over and be like, "Officer, I promise this is legal."
Right.
So then you also have license handling companies in the state, so they're allowed to transport from licensee to licensee.
Okay.
So I mean, it could be if it's just the buds and the cola is dried, it's in bags, and we can essentially ship it by USPS, or I prefer driving it, of course.
Right.
Or it can be the back of a huge box truck, and you're just throwing plants in there.
And so for people that don't know, I mean, hemp, like the thing with hemp is that it looks like marijuana, right?
Very, very similar.
The plant is the same family, looks like it, and it smells like it.
Yes.
Okay. So what is the primary difference between what we would get from, an illegal marijuana plant, that's a whole separate podcast or whatever, and, a legal hemp plant? Like, what are we looking at in terms of,
Yeah, thank you, because I was about to go, like, you have 30 more minutes.
Oh, right.
So generally, if it's a legal, so like, recreational medical cannabis and hemp, it's all cannabis, right? So technically, as long as it's under that 0.3% Delta 9 THC, it is considered hemp, and it's federally and state legal.
Okay.
Once you go over that 0.3%, it is now considered marijuana and illegal, unless the state laws are different.
Okay.
Generally, when you're looking at the plant is going to be under that 0.3% THC. But depending on the strain, it could be high in CBG, which is another cannabinoid. It's going to usually contain a lot of CBD, which is another cannabinoid. Right. You can extract terpenes from the plant, and so terpene, to me, that's the most amazing thing about it. So, like, essentially every plant in nature has a terpene, and the cannabis plant has traces of every single one of them.
Oh, wow.
That's why I always say it's God's plant.
Right.
But,
interesting.
So generally, the plant is going to get extracted 9 times out of 10. Now, another funny thing with the laws here, and for me, is when we talk about hemp flower, when I'm talking about hemp flower, smokable hemp flower, the Department of Agriculture and the Attorney General's stance on that is hemp flower looks like marijuana. You can't tell the difference. So, understandably, they're worried about their officers being able to enforce law, so they say it's illegal. Is it? It's a great question. I mean, I understand in the South Carolina bill, it does say raw plant is not considered a hemp product.
Right.
A lot of us in the industry would say, well, if I am drying it, curing it, trimming it, putting it in packaging, labeling it, that's a finished product.
So turn into this, the Hemp Farming Act. So in the act, obviously you are allowed to, if you have a license, possess hemp flowers. I mean, fields of them. However many acres of hemp plants you have has flowers. But it's illegal, if I'm understanding you correctly, to sell that flower.
For licensees.
Yes. Okay. So that's the interesting part. So we've actually regulated licensees more stringently than we have regulated the general public.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how that works. I don't have a hemp license. I could probably spot a hemp flower if, we had one. But I could actually, as long as it's not above that 0.3 THC and it's not a legal marijuana, I could actually, give that to somebody or sell that, but you could not.
Yeah, so in the wordage of the hemp farming bill and also the agreements we signed with the state, if I grow hemp flower and I process it, let's say trim it and make it presentable and packaging in a done smokable form.
Right.
If I was to sell that to you as a non-license holder, I can lose my license and potentially face jail time, essentially. But nothing's stopping you from buying it online because it is federally legal. Nothing's stopping you from buying it at a store located in South Carolina because they don't have a license, and they can buy it from someone online and then just resell it.
And it just comes through the mail?
It just comes through the mail.
Federal Postal Service can just bring it over from somewhere where it's legal, right?
And that's something I was 2 years ago vocal about.
Yes.
I was essentially told, as long as you're selling it to someone out of state, that's all they care about.
Right.
And I said, well, what if I sell it to a distributor in North Carolina and then he sells it back into South Carolina?
Right.
And I was told, as long as you have that chain of custody proving that I sold it to North Carolina, I'm okay. And I'm like, well, aren't South Carolina farmers losing if we're all about homegrown and selling in South Carolina businesses? If
you're losing the margin.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're putting a middleman into the chain where we don't really need a middleman.
Yes.
Yeah. And what about, I mean, the state of South Carolina is losing too, because, technically, I guess that would be being sold in North Carolina. So from a tax perspective, right, we would lose revenue on that.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about kind of your business and how you got started with, Carolina Dream. I know you told us a little bit of the origin story. Tell us what you do. What does it look like today? And then I want to talk about, this latest update where basically they just put, a stick in the wheel of the hemp industry and said, good luck.
Mm-hmm. So Carolina Dream, funny enough, it was the naming was I moved back to South Carolina to do this, and I was on the phone with one of my best friends, and he's like, "Well, this has been a dream of yours to do this." So Carolina Dream, I was like, "All right, cool, sticking with it." And it's almost more of a, I always say we're more than a business, we're a movement.
Yeah.
For me, of course, being an advocate for cannabis laws in South Carolina, my end goal and mission statement is I want it to be so legal that you can grow it yourself and put me out of business.
Right.
Because I believe in freedom.
Right.
That's
a novel thought, by the way. Believing in freedom.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Who would have thought? But yeah, so the products it just started with, I just saw the discrepancies between the hemp industry and the legal cannabis industry when it comes to the legalization of cannabis. I listen. The one thing about politics, I would have never thought I would enjoy it as much as I do.
Right.
But when you sit there and listen to their discussions for 8 hours a day, when you listen to the opposition, a lot of them aren't wrong, and they're there to protect South Carolinians.
Right.
And it gave me a very different perspective on, well, a lot of the opposition to these cannabis bills, they just don't understand it. And I mean, that goes into this DHEC letter, essentially. Right. So I want to, essentially, we call it the Carolina standard. I want to have the standard of what I hold my products to, which is similar to Colorado. That should be the standard for hemp, period.
Right.
And also we got into, I guess you could say, my creativeness with making products. Everyone's seen CBD, everyone's seen the Delta stuff, everyone's seen pet CBD, but for me it was more so, let's make products that actually help. And again, I can't say help, so not FDA approved.
Right.
I'm not a doctor.
That people think help.
Yeah, but customers, I guess you could say, hey, I'm having these issues, and I want to find something for that. So one of my first creativity was our Uplift tincture was. So number one was I need something for my pets because we care about our animals more than us.
That's right.
Yes, and number two was I love CBD. I love the stress relief, musculoskeletal issues I have, but it makes me drowsy.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, I know that CBG is known to be more uplifting and help with the creative thought process, non-medically, of course. And then I can make a formula of those terpenes into it where it doesn't make you drowsy whatsoever. And that's been our best-selling tincture. And then I was like, now let's put this in a gummy.
Right.
And that's been our best-selling gummy. So now it's a really cool. I just listen to feedback of customers and, what do you want to feel in a way? And then we can make products for that.
Interesting. And so right now, obviously you have the gummy product. What is this? How does this product work?
So the Dreamer is nighttime. So if you're familiar with hemp products, you know that CBD and another cannabinoid, CBN, is known to help with sleep.
Yeah.
Again, I put another concoction of terpenes in there to help with, I guess, getting non-clinically tested, falling asleep and staying asleep better. So the main terpene in there has a little bit of a pepper taste to it.
So that's really the cool thing about the plant, because all of our kind of remedies and medicines come from terpenes in different plants, but this plant has all of them, in some way. So that's pretty interesting. So tell us a little bit about, we got the Hemp Farming Act here. I mean, it's pretty short. It's like 3.5 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is, and I think you said it today, but basically the industry wants to be regulated. I mean, the people that are operating businesses in this space want regulation to protect consumers, right?
Absolutely. Because to me, it's a lot of us see the bad actors.
Right.
And I'm not saying that it's South Carolina businesses being bad actors at all. It could be any, again, this is federally legal. It can come from any state.
And we have that in every industry.
Absolutely.
We have that in the law. Obviously, we just had a very long trial about some of that. Everybody watched on national TV.
Yeah, and it's so for the businesses that are doing the right thing, in which, in my opinion, this DHEC letter goes after us, we want to protect consumers with you, but you also need to empower South Carolina businesses.
Right.
So the farming bill, it's very simple in itself. That's why I support that hemp regulation bill,
right,
in which it would also require manufacturers and people that sell products to get a license with the Department of Ag. I support that, and it would all the Delta THC products would have a 4% tax on top of it to run the program. I support that. That helps with testing, and essentially it's going to weed out all the bad actors.
Right.
So I would say that bill does more to help the consumer. So I know let's get to the DHEC bill. Let's talk about this letter.
So bring us up to speed. So we have this. This was passed in 2014, so it's been around for a while.
Yes.
Everyone's good with this. The hemp industry in South Carolina, blossomed in a way. We had a lot of really good stuff going on locally. In addition to what you're doing, we have other, South Carolina farmers and small business owners that have figured out a way to make the economics work. And that was all going pretty well until when?
So the letter officially came out on January 22nd, but
this year, 2020,
this year.
brand new.
Brand new. But from what I understand, and my friends I've talked to, mainly going after the seltzer companies that make the hemp seltzers in the state.
Right.
Two of them have already moved out of state, and one that's staying is with us in this coalition. We're fighting against the state with it.
Right.
Essentially, this is mainly going after those drinks. Like, I have not received this letter from DHEC.
Okay.
So I was given to it literally 2 weeks ago.
Okay. And DHEC, this is not a law. This is a letter.
A guideline.
A guideline based on DHEC's interpretation of the law.
Yes.
Okay. And the people at DHEC that wrote this letter didn't sign it. So we don't know necessarily who they are, I suppose. But did anyone from DHEC, as far as you know, ever sit down with the industry and kind of work through the law and the guidelines?
So I will say, from my friends in those seltzer companies, they've been going back and forth with DHEC and trying to come to a consensus since September of last year.
Okay.
And it's just, there's been a lot of, and it's somewhat in that letter. So I guess the bigger issue with that was, so these are technically dietary supplements. Okay. It's not a food or beverage.
Right.
If you're canning a beverage in South Carolina, you have to do that in a DHEC approved facility.
Right.
So that's why DHEC got involved.
Right.
And
which they had. They were DHEC approved facilities. All these things were being done in, clean facilities and all like that.
Yeah.
There was no issue until the letter.
Yes.
Okay.
And essentially where it gets into one, it's pulling the rug out of South Carolina businesses, right. And it's the label, not being able to label what cannabinoid is in a drink, and then also the dose of it is so destructive to the industry, and then making it unsafe to the consumer. So let's say
this letter says you actually cannot
use the word.
Tell the consumer how much the dose is that's in the can.
No, all we can say is hemp extract or oil.
Hemp extract. So, you could have, a can of seltzer that has double what another can of seltzer does, and the consumer has no way of knowing.
Or one has CBD in it, and another one has just, let's say, Delta-9 hemp-derived THC in it.
Right.
And you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
I'm scared because what else going to take is one or two consumers to sue me.
Right.
And it's very unsafe.
Right. Very unsafe. So, how does this come from that law? How do we get here from there?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because to me, the analogy I use is you have a peanut allergy,
right,
and you want to buy trail mix. You look out on the back of the ingredients, say trail mix.
Right.
How do you know?
And I can't tell you if there's peanuts in it or how much peanuts or whether it's made. I've even seen on packages now it says made in a facility where peanuts are processed. And so what what's the point of this? I mean, do we have any kind of idea of why DHEC would release a letter that, essentially not only put South Carolina small businesses that are processing and manufacturing the seltzers out of business or makes them move out of state, which is going to happen because people are going to, make money in most cases if they can. But it also hurts our farmers. I mean, now our farmers have a smaller market for the raw product, that they're producing. So, I mean, what's the point of this?
Yeah, so I mean, I understand and I agree with the objective. We all can. It's consumer protection.
Okay.
And we, like I said, we have a coalition. We're sitting down with DHEC to properly rectify and say, to an extent, you can't tell me this. We're going to follow the law. If in my opinion, if you want to impose something on like that, you need to go through the General Assembly and have it as a law passed. When it comes to the businesses, I would say it's farmers and processors, because it's saying that any single given material has to be under that 0.3% THC. So when I take my hemp flower, the biomass, and I go to a processor, when they're extracting it from the plant to a crude, and then I guess you could say synthetically to an oil, there's going to be portions there where it's going to slightly go over that, if that makes
sense. Over that 0.3. Okay.
And again, I'm not a processor,
right.
quote me, but it's from all the processors that I've spoken to, they're all out of business now.
Because this letter says that you cannot actually possess any material that's over the 0.3, even in the chain of production.
Yes.
But what we also know is that you can't look at a plant or a processing plant or a product or anything else and actually know the amount of THC without testing, right?
Yes. So it's a very complicated. There's a lot of science, but and I guess another way why also hurts manufacturers of products also is in that with you can only use hemp extract oil. They said in the natural array of CBD to THC and other cannabinoids. So technically, if I hold on to isomers like CBG, CBN, those terpenes, I can't hold on to those anymore
because
according to that guideline, because it's not natural.
Right.
And again, that would probably be, I think we spoke on this earlier. It's a $290 million a year industry in retail, and I can tell you
in South Carolina.
In South Carolina alone.
Wow.
And I can tell you right now, if that stays true, I would say about 90% of that's going to go away.
Wow.
Because that means you're only having just CBDS itself.
Right.
Which again, if they want to do that, go through the General Assembly. Right.
So $290 million a year industry, just on the 4%, we're up to like $14 million in revenue for the state.
And that's a conservative number from what I understand.
Right. So, all right. So just kind of backing up a little bit here. So if we say, okay, you can never have more than the 0.3% on the THC, we can't look at it and tell. So basically, if we're going to operate a processing business, creating seltzers or anything else in South Carolina, we're kind of relying on luck, right? Because even when DHEC shows up and tests our product in the processing line, DHEC doesn't know for another week until the tests come back, right? So there's really nothing that we can do if we're the processor to moderate or modulate that. All that happens on the back end is we're going to get dinged pursuant and lose our DHEC certification.
And the way I kind of look at it is, if we're these business entities, we have monetary contribution, we have all this liability of running a business and doing it legally, taxes and all that stuff. And if we are already going through, let's say, the processes and farmers, the background checks to make sure we haven't done anything illegal that could be, tied into this, and we're doing all this testing, to me, this letter just takes away the trust and responsibility away from us.
Right.
To me, that letter is saying we don't trust any of you. Let's say we're putting CBG or something in it. Of course, a product does not enter a bag until I can put a compliancy label on the back of it, of knowing exactly how much is in each piece and it's in the bag. Right. So to me, I'm completely okay with making stores and manufacturers of these goods have permits also, because to me, South Carolina needs to trust us a little bit.
Right.
Unfortunately, I know the powers that be that don't want to see cannabis be legalized. Like this isn't going away.
Right.
This is federally legal, and we just said how much of this stuff sells in the state, and when it comes to like the medical cannabis bill that's currently being debated in the Senate currently,
right.
I think 76% of South Carolinians want that to be legal.
Right.
So if this continues and they make essentially 90% of this illegal, people are just going to find a way.
Right. Anytime you have, conservatively $300 million at stake, people are going to find a way.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's a capitalist society. That's the way it works. The market will find a way. We tried this in Prohibition with outlawing alcohol. That didn't go so well. It made a lot of people that were willing to break the law very wealthy.
Yep.
But it did not get rid of alcohol. Right. And so, this is obviously not going to get rid of cannabis or THC, both of which, CBD, all of this existed before the 2014 Hemp Farming Act. I mean, people were growing marijuana in South Carolina before it was legal to grow hemp, right?
Yeah. It was, you're talking 1936 with the Marijuana Tax Act.
Right.
I mean, cannabis was in the Pharmaceuticopedia.
Right.
And it was a widely distributed medicine until it was, demonized in the 30s.
Right.
And then, looking back at history with the 30s, I mean, back then, in my opinion, we didn't know the science and the benefits of it. So I can, there's a lot of discriminatory stuff that happened and why it's illegal and why that started, of course, but I can almost turn an eye to it. But during the 70s with Nixon and the Controlled Substance Act, we knew the benefits.
Right.
And I mean, you can Google Richard Nixon marijuana and you can hear it from his own mouth. He essentially wanted to throw people of color and hippies in jail so they can't vote against them. And that's why he made it illegal.
Right.
And that's why to this day, even if the House and Congress passed a bill saying cannabis is now a Schedule III drug, the DEA still has final word.
Right.
So it's
and federally we've done away with that. We realized it was a mistake, to overregulate, to make illegal all of this sort of thing, and they did away with it. But in South Carolina, as is often the case, we're still living a little bit in the last century. Although in 2014 we got it right with the Hemp Farming Act, and now it seems like DHEC is trying to take us backwards again. So, I mean, what can be done, with respect to this DHEC letter? Like, what can normal people do to be helpful?
Well, of course, call your state legislators.
Right.
So that's not Lindsey Graham. That's your state senator and then House representative.
Right.
I mean, realistically, this almost doesn't have anything to do with the General Assembly either, because it's a Department of Health.
Right.
And it's getting weird because we know that in July 1st, the Department of Health and Environmental Control is splitting, and we don't know which one's going under the Department of Ag. So it's going to get really complicated before it gets better.
Yeah.
It's, to me, in all the advocacy work and people I've talked to, besides two people, all the people I know that are against cannabis are in that state house. Out of all the people I talked to, there's been two that say, yes, it should stay and be legal. Other than that, even if you don't want to be legalized, what's, to me, freedom of choice in my medicine?
Right.
Why is your opinion have to make it so I have to be a criminal to choose my medicine?
Right. And
when it comes to this letter, I know I had an invitation to move out of state, and this is Carolina dream, not Tennessee dream. I'm not leaving.
Right.
We're fighting back, and we're going to essentially make this right, because South Carolinians deserve that.
Right. And all we're looking for, is just people to sit down and talk with the industry to come up with common sense regulation that protects consumers, but allows farmers and small business owners to do what they do in a way that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, so for instance, if you're a store and you're buying a pallet or whatever of product, before you sell it, maybe you have to go to the Department of Ag and get it tested in state to ensure it is what it says it is.
Right.
We want that regulation. Again, we want the regulation. I, as a capitalist, I never thought I would say that. I want the regulation.
Right.
It's going to just, one, make it safer, two, get, I guess you could say, some of the bad actors in government off our backs a little bit, and you just have to trust us.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, this is really not hurting anybody except small business owners and farmers in South Carolina, because the seltzer, that they're now having to make out of state can still be sold here. It just cannot inform the consumer about the strength of it. right? I mean, am I understanding that right?
Yes.
This is the equivalent to me. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you buy a bottle of alcohol, or anybody buys a bottle of alcohol, it says the proof, right? So it tells you what you're dealing with. And basically, what they're saying is you can't label what proof the seltzer is,
or how many milligrams of Oxycontin is
right.
Oxycontin.
Right. You just got to take one and find out.
Yeah.
F around and find out, as the kids say. That's good stuff. I mean, it's very, very interesting. Very sad that it's come to this, and we certainly appreciate you being in the fight, and anything we can do, we're here for you.
Absolutely.
So, all right.